I should probably say hello at some point. This presentation is Web Accessibility and Site Governance in Drupal. And the subject of the presentation has changed slightly over the past few days, but I hope it's still on track and relevant. But I should probably just give a quick introduction to myself. My name is John Lockhart. I'm the School Web Development Officer at the Edinburgh Law School at the University of Edinburgh. I'm very lucky that we've been joined by some of our other colleagues at the University of Edinburgh because we're quite a large organisation. I'm going to probably say the name, she'll love me for saying this, I'm probably going to say the name Emma Horrell quite a few times during this presentation because she's a really valued colleague and not only within the University of Edinburgh, she's the user experience manager in the University of Edinburgh. She's also contributing a lot to the Drupal community, and I think she's like, when it comes to Starshot and the user experience lead, she's doing a lot. So I'll probably she's here just a second ago, but she's doing her presentation right now, so she's in demand. So I'm, as I say, I'm the School Web Development Officer at the Edinburgh Law School. I'm going to start off by saying that this presentation was actually inspired by somebody else completely. It's a man called Hidi de Vries, and he's a lovely man. I actually met him recently in Amsterdam at an accessibility conference. And it was his talk that I was largely inspired by. And it was a really fascinating talk. It's called Your CMS as an Accessibility Assistant. It's available via his website, and there's also a recording on YouTube. I'd check it out because this is obviously, we're going to be obviously focusing a bit on Drupal, but the great thing about this subject is that you can take your approach into whatever management framework that you're using and content management framework, and it's he makes some excellent points throughout the whole thing. So definitely check him out. Hidi is a front-end accessibility and design system specialist. He's worked, I think he's currently working with the Dutch government on their design system, and his background is W3C, Sanity.io, Mozilla. I know a little bit about the accessibility community, and I know that everybody who I deeply respect in the accessibility community internationally, they've got a lot of time for Hidi, and he's a great guy. So I'd definitely check him out, check his blog. Very nice man. He very nicely, gave me permission to use aspects of his presentation in this talk. So I feel I should probably try and explain to you how I got here, specifically here doing this presentation. It's about 5 or 6 years ago, and at the Edinburgh Law School website, we were in a position where we were looking to, we had to move our system from an old content management framework to Drupal, basically. And this happened about 5 or 6 years ago. And the university does have a central website publishing platform. We've had it for many years. The existing one's called EdWeb. The one that I'll be referring to is the new one called EdWeb 2, the website publishing platform. At that time, we were not in a position to move to that. So we were basically looking to move from a completely old system to Drupal, but also working with a third-party agency in the design. And essentially, one of the things that I remember from that experience was that was just about 2019, sorry. Going way back here. It was about the time that, just at that time, we were about to launch the law school website. We were subject at that time to a thing called the Public Sector Body Accessibility Regulations in the UK, which is the UK implementation of the Web Accessibility Directive throughout Europe. Essentially, if you're working in a public sector organisation, you have to essentially, your website has to meet the WCAG. Back then it was 2.1 AA, it's now 2.2 AA. This is a rolling law that you have to test, automated and manually test your website, produce an accessibility report, publish an accessibility statement, which is a very formatted document. It's based upon a government template. You can't deviate from very much, you've got to do that. And it's the law. And if you don't meet these standards, you get fined by the Cabinet Digital and Data Office, who is auditing your public sector website, and they do. We're not paranoid. We know. We've had some experience with that. So this was all going on exactly at the time that I was meant to be, like working with a third-party agency and doing that. And yeah, that was fun. And maybe some of you may sympathise with that. Maybe some of you won't, but it's coming for a lot of us, as it were. So anyway, so this brought me to my hypothesis, which was accessibility is hard, and I still don't think it's going to get any easier. So why isn't accessibility easier? this kind of high-minded motion of built-in accessibility. Can we build our accessibility into our products? It's a lovely idea. I don't think we'll ever get there, but let me try and stay positive through this. I'll try and not be too negative about this. I'll try and be positive. So before I get on to, I think where I'm coming on to, I'd love to pursue this idea of accessibility built into the CMS. That'd be a lovely idea. So before I get too far down that road, maybe let's look at some things that are out with the content management system at the moment, but obviously out with the content management system, just to cover them and just to sort of go through them one by one, I suppose. Don't use overlays. This is a personal opinion. Also, I presume a lot of you, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but I assume that a lot of you are aware of these things called website overlays for web accessibility. There's a lot of companies out there that offer these products that you attach a little bit of JavaScript to the bottom of your site, and there's a lot of third-party voodoo that goes on to somehow, and of course they'll sell you the product and say, well, this will make your website accessible. You'll have the most inaccessible website, but don't worry, sir, pay your money, and you'll have an automatically compliant website within just sign up here. Yeah. So when I wrote this originally, things move fast. I don't know if you saw the Dries note yesterday, but there were some moments in there where I was sitting there going, oh, things are moving quite quickly. So I'm always scared of like saying something and then like things overtake you. But there's still some principles that I'm not sure are going to go away. And certainly when you work in an environment like the University of Edinburgh, we have certain standards that we're just, like people do things in the private sector. We just can't do that in public sector. And we're more than public sector. At the University of Edinburgh, we have a large like healthcare part of our environment. Like there's data that, we just can't, this is government stuff, science and engineering. We just can't do what other people do. So there's a lot of regulations there. So, and I think when it comes back to accessibility and a lot of the things that I'll cover, my personal experience is that you need to have close to total control over your website in order to address the source issues. The more you outsource it, it's not, you lose control at that point. So that's been my experience over time. Also, having heard users with disabilities use some of these things, a lot of them times they just don't work. They depend on assistive technologies. The University of Edinburgh, we have to test not only with them for the WCAG, but we also use a lot of assistive technologies as part of our experience, whether it be using things like screen readers or Zoom, like text magnification or voice control. Like there's a lot of assistive software that we have to test with on top of the meeting the WCAG regulations. So. And a lot of users complain that when they try and use these overlays, it actually gets in their way. It actually interferes with the assistive software. So I just thought I'd say that before I get people. The lawsuits are coming in just as I speak, but let's not tempt fate. Let's just move on from that. So I try and discourage from that. Although I might be a bit nuanced about this. Sometimes I might say, well, maybe there's some things we can look at, but as I say, so I'm not always consistent. But on the whole, if somebody's promising an overlay, maybe on the whole, don't do it. And do read the overlay fact sheet for more information on this. There's a lot of good resources on that too. The slides will be made available soon, so don't worry too much about that, but do take a picture if you want. Design systems are an excellent way of building in accessibility to some of your work. If you've got, like the University of Edinburgh, you have a consistent design system. I suppose the classic example that we're all aware of is the UK government design system, that there's a lot of the idea there of having a consistent templates, consistent components, a consistent design system that you can build consistent user experiences and consistent experience, and you can build in a lot of accessibility, test the components for accessibility, be able to manage your templates and use the components in the right order to maintain accessibility. If you're able to take your design and split it up into reusable components, then you can make your accessibility, or at least some of it, reusable and repeatable. You've got to be careful about the document structure and how you structure your web pages and the templates you based upon. But yeah, sure, if you have well-tested components in the right and logical order, you can make accessibility reusable and repeatable across teams, across development teams. And we've got a link to the Edinburgh design system, but there's obviously a lot of people using their bespoke design systems as well, and templates for like regular cases like events or people profiles or things like that. So you want to encourage that. One example that I'm going to probably come back to again is the card component. This will be a bit of a theme that will come through and the presentation is that you can document your design system in a way of saying, hey, this is how you're supposed to use this component. You can explain to users who are not all gurus, a lot of the editors may be using the environment, and we'll talk about how the environment that they use, they'll be using the content management system. They won't be directly accessing the design system code. They'll be actually using the content management framework and how that's governed within that. So you can explain to users through training support how the web component is used and why that helps. So I've got a bit of an example here of a web page. It's a slightly dated web page, but it's just to give the idea that on the Edinburgh University website, and by the way, if you do go on the Edinburgh University website, we are in the middle of a migration. So don't be entirely surprised if you see like some pages in the old version and some pages in the new version. So we're on our journey, but there's a sort of consistency to it. One of the consistencies of our design system is a kind of like a navigation page or sort of signposting page. This is a classic example of a university website publishing page, which is kind of like a signposting navigation page with a call to the areas that you're wishing to go to, EdWeb, CMS, the site design and consultancy services, training support and resources services part of these are all using what I'd call card components, and it's used as part of delivering a navigation style page. So you can then train and support users to build these kind of landing pages, or these sort of pages as it were. On the left of the screen, you should obviously see there's a little Chrome plugin, although I think it's available in other browsers as well. It's called Headings Map, and I love this plugin because it basically takes the headings that it recognizes in the page and builds that kind of table of contents using headings. Now, although I just love this plugin, it's great, it also reminds you that when you use screen readers, this is how a lot of people use to navigate within the page. If you're using a screen reader, you can navigate within the page via using headings. And so, again, being able to communicate to editors and users, like, use this consistent user experience, then not only are you serving everybody, but you're serving people who are using assistive technologies as well, using these standards like proper use of headings in your document. And that's the power of being able to build that into your design system approach. And if I forget to say this, by the way, if you haven't, spend some time over a week when you've got some free time, use a screen reader. I've struggled with the past a bit sometimes, trying to get my head around accessibility. Accessibility is not all about screen readers, but for a while, use a screen reader. Download something free like NVDA is a great platform, free open source in Windows. Or if you're on a Mac, just use VoiceOver. For a week, just try using a screen reader and then trying this kind of empathy to try and say, well, how do people, especially people with visual issues, disabilities, how do they perceive a website? And try and empathize with it. It really opens up your eyes if you haven't done that. So I definitely recommend that if you haven't done that already. Browsers, possibly in the future, and maybe currently, could help the situation by maybe seeing some of the issues there, and like the browser could say to itself, look, I know the standard, I know that something should be addressed, and I know what the developer's trying to do, so maybe I should just intervene and say, look, maybe I should just take over. Maybe there's some poorly coded websites out there that they could just say, look, I know the standard, maybe I could try and overtake the situation using a standards-based approach. This is kind of controversial, but there are certainly maybe some ideas in this. Maybe sometimes you try and force focus indication. I think Microsoft Edge claims to do that. I've never really tried it very much, but I think there's certain browsers that are trying to say, look, we know what the standard is, we know what the issue is, and maybe we can just, like, as a browser, impose this. It's a bit controversial. I wouldn't hold my breath. And also, there's a little bit about, well, we want to encourage people with high standards. We don't want people to just think that the browser is going to pick up the slack or things like that. So it's an interesting little article, and definitely have a look at that link. I wouldn't hold your breath, and I wouldn't rely on that, so I wouldn't look into that too much. HTML, it just comes back to standards. Like, if we have standards, let's use them. And I might come on to this later about if we have standards there that are there, just use them in the way that everyone, including the browser and the compiler, can understand. Problems can be fixed using just good standards-based HTML. The image tag, like there's a little attribute that allows you to add the alternative text in the image. The video tag with captions, apply the caption information in the browser. If the functionality is already there in the standard, use it. Like, don't try not to be too clever. I'm not accusing anyone of being clever, but sometimes people can invent new solutions that really don't adhere to this at all. Content management systems can help with accessibility. Like, a good CMS can help with accessibility in the authoring process as an authoring tool. So assessing content management systems in a couple of ways. We've got the WCAG regulations. I think most of the people in the room will be pretty aware of this, is that the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are designed to make the web content more accessible. In the UK perspective, we've got the public sector body accessibility regulations, which comes from the EU law, the Web Accessibility Directive law. I know that we've left the EU, but I can assure you we are still, from the contacts I've had with the government, they're back. they never gone away. So no, and we've actually in the past few months we're now up to WCAG 2.2 AA. So there's absolutely no sign. We're still being audited by the government. I've heard recently we're being audited. They're back on the warpath. So from the UK perspective, that's the high bar that we're meeting in the public sector. As I say, there are similar regulations for other jurisdictions around the world, which I have varying knowledge of, in the sense that I'm aware that the European Accessibility Act is coming up in 2025, and a lot of people in Europe are going to be aware of that. That's going to broaden things out, very similar to what we're facing in the public sector, but it's going to start branching that out into aspects of the private sector, financial services. And they'll have their regulatory bodies, their monitoring bodies. So I think there's still a bit of that being sorted out, but that's coming in the European Union. America, they've got strong legislation, and I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in the American situation, but my understanding is in America, they've got very strong legislation, but it has to be somebody has to make a complaint for something to happen. That's my very loose understanding. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in this, but that's my understanding of the situation, is that they've got very strong laws, but it has to come from a complaint, and that complaint has to be pursued. That's my understanding. I've talked to colleagues in universities in America, and they are certainly under as much pressure as I am about their web pages and their learning environments. I won't get too much into that, but you've got to remember that the law, certainly in the UK case, we're not just talking websites, it's in theory anything that comes through a browser. If you really look at the law carefully, it's not just websites. It's like if your app comes through a web browser, then in theory, you're part, if your institution is depending on it, that's how it's covered. So just be aware of that. So that's just a quick rundown of the regulations that we're looking at. And it's just coming down the track for a lot of us anyway, one way or the other, no matter what sector you're in. So a lot of us are familiar with the WCAG, but there's these guidelines called the ATAG, which I will admit, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I find it very interesting area if you go and look up these guidelines. The motivation of these guidelines is based upon the authoring tool accessibility. And it sort of loosely can be split into two parts. Like part A is making the authoring tools themselves accessible so that people with disabilities can create web content. So like following WCAG, like people who are using screen readers can use an admin interface, for example, things like that. So that's one area of it. But there's this second part B, which is also interesting. It's a bit nuanced, but it's quite interesting. And I'm reading here. It'll help authors create more accessible web content, specifically enable, support, and promote the production of content that conforms to the WCAG guidelines. And it's this promote the content, promote the production of content that conforms to the WCAG. I just find a very interesting idea. It's quite nuanced, and it's not a guarantee. You'll see in a second that I don't think you can just say we prove that we can meet this, but it's an aspiration, it's a goal. And it is, and there's a link there to sort of examine it a bit more. I will admit I'm not an expert in this, but it's just an interesting idea for me. So we've got some examples here, just to give an idea, like B112. When content is auto-created, that there's a prompt in the system for required accessibility information. So that can mean, for example, when you're trying to put a table, you put a caption on it. When you're entering images in, it forces you to say you must consider alt text. There's decorative, and I know that's controversial, but you've got to consider alt text, labels for form fields, and that's built into the content management in editing authoring system. B211, ensure that accessible content production is possible. So for each image field that there's an alt text field, for each video player field that there's a captions upload for. These are things that you can look at building into your content management system. It's this idea, oh right, I've skipped one, sorry. And as I say, the W3C is actually setting up a list of these tools. It's a slightly informal process, and I think the project, I think it's largely done by volunteers, and it's not by no means extensive. But if you go to this web link, at this time of writing, they've listed 5 authoring tools that volunteers have assessed and looked at, and they sort of mark how well they meet the guidelines and how well they meet and do they recommend, or at least they don't recommend them, but they say how well do they meet the guidelines, and they go through them. There, at the time of writing, there's 5 authoring tools that are listed on this web page. One of them is Drupal core. There are others. I will note that all of them, to my knowledge, are open source, which I personally find interesting. The open source is something we're going to come back to. Well, we're Drupal. We are open source, you know. So that's something. But there's also transparency in there as well. So it's interesting that. I'm just trying not to say certain things, but like certainly there's certain types of providers out there that say, oh, our environment is great and it's accessible and it's secure and all this stuff. And that's great, but I don't know because they're behind a paywall. They want to reiterate, you know, it's like they may well be. They may, I mean, and I'm open-minded about this stuff, but I don't know. With open source, it's transparent. It's out there. You know, this is going to come up again and again. So it's this idea of supporting the production of accessible content. I just find it very interesting, and coming back to this idea of CMSs as accessibility assistants, that the CMS is there to help you produce accessible content. I just find that interesting. That's what Hiddy's talk really started to me think from my perspective, running a university website, you know, how we do this. So I'm going to just give a couple of examples, as I said. They're pretty simple examples, but just to try and give you a flavor of what I'm talking about here. So again, I referred to earlier on an example about using a card component for like a simple navigation web page that a content user can build in a consistent way. So here's a page that these screenshots are a little bit out of date. I should probably mention, this is a screenshot of our new website publishing platform that we're migrating currently over to at the moment. It's called EdWeb 2. It's built upon Drupal. We're up to Drupal 10 now, I believe. We've just announced that, so we're very happy about that. And we're using techniques within Drupal 10 to move it. The old one was based on Drupal 7, but now we're moving on to Drupal 10. And again, this is as you can see, a pretty straightforward navigation page, landing page, which is going to take you to pages not dissimilar to the one I showed earlier. And it's being able to say, well, how do we use the interface to look to editors to build these sort of landing pages? And I will admit that we do have a lot of training and support behind this. So it's not like we just leave people to it. There's a lot of training. There's a mandatory training that editors have to go through, which includes not just using the system, but also covers effective digital content, building accessible content. Content design is something that we're spending a lot of time on. So there's a lot more than just the content management system going on here. And so these are screenshots. They may not be entirely clear, but I'll try and be as clear as I can about this. Is that this is the end result. But from the back end, if you're using it from the back end, now you do get training support on this. You're not just left to do this on your own. But this is a back end view of our current system. As I say, it moves on slightly, but it's still roughly where we are at the moment, where it's maybe not quite clear. By the way, people who are interested in this, we're using, I think, a combination of, I think, the Gin theme and paragraphs. People are really technically interested in some of these things. I don't know if you can just gently see at the top that there's a little layout for 3 columns in the row that you can add your row, but you can add, do you want like 2 across, the 3 across columns as part of the grid? And then this gives you a selection of what essentially are components. And these are the components that you can carefully add. You can tell there's flexibility here, but you can see you can carefully add the components as you do. So as you can see in the sort of top left, you can start to add a card component. You tend to only expose the areas that you need the editor to have access to. So we're using a form of paragraphs here, the Drupal module paragraphs, that is, where it's kind of not terribly easy to see here, but for example, we can add our image, and you can just see up there, we added an image there, add a title, and a link to, that'll link off from the title, a bit of body text, and then only expose the areas that the editor needs. You save that, and then you do that 5 more times, and as if by magic, you've got your web page. You notice how I seamlessly jumped to that, and there's no messiness or problems there whatsoever. You just got there instantly, of course. life's not entirely like that, but there is extensive training support to show people do that. I just, on a personal note, I just wanted to say that our current website is not currently on Edge Web 2. I'm doing it myself at the moment, although we will be migrating to Edge Web 2. And at the moment, I've still got a bit of flexibility to do certain things, like, for example, on the people profile page, that's just a content type that I've literally just built the content type with the Drupal fields and locked it down. So there's not really a lot of flexibility there. Now, as you can see on that previous one, potentially you could have quite a lot of flexibility, and that's part of the remit, is that there's a number of reasons why with the university we need to address the user base and have that flexibility there. In an ideal world, you just like lock it down and say, no, you can't deviate. Like a people profile, you don't want people to change anything. Now, life's not like that. It's not that simple. So you have to sort of have this balance of saying, right, we want to have flexibility, but with flexibility comes accountability and responsibility and how we meet the regulations and how we meet our objectives with this. So you build that, it's a balance. I try and use the word guardrails to try and say, look, you're on the road and you've got these barriers that are meant to stop you driving off the highway, that you're meant to actually say, look, these are, you're meant to keep within that. And you have to offer training and support to make sure that you're expected to do the right thing. So a bit of flexibility, but at the same time, there are some ground rules there. So that's one way of looking at it within, and that's one example from the content management framework that we have at the University of Edinburgh. One other example of this idea of producing accessible content is using a module, carefully using a module. There's an example of a module here called AccessibIlity, which is an accessibility checker module that helps content authors create accessible web content. It's a good example, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. It's a valuable tool for helping content authors meet the W3C, not only not the WCAG, but also the ATAG regulations. It's available as a free Drupal module. I think it's based upon another open source kit called Sally, which is available on other platforms, and the web link is there. It's maintained by a very nice man at Princeton University, and they largely maintain the project. Free open source, and definitely take a look at that. Editorial can help content authors meet the W3C ATAG regulations up to a point. It can check for a wide range of accessibility issues, including those covered by the ATAG regulations. It provides feedback to the editor for potential accessibility issues and helpful tips on how to fix them. I do apologize. There's a couple of examples here that it can specifically help with ATAG 212, ensure that all non-text content has a text equivalent, so editorial can check for missing or empty alt text for images. ATAG 221, structure the content of web pages in a way that's consistent with the HTML specification, and editorial can check for missing or incorrect headings, for example. I've got some screenshots here. Oh, by the way, editorial is not an overlay. So this is something that's open source. The code is freely available to everybody. You can download it. It sits on your server, and so you own the code. Obviously, you're responsible for it, but you download the code. And it's only, it does not modify the site for you. It's like assisting you in the process. It helps you in the process, but you ultimately make the decisions. That, in my understanding, is that it'll alert you to the issues, but you're still responsible. And it's like an assistant, not viewed by anybody outside the environment. You've got to be logged in to see it. Editor-facing accessibility system that helps site editors create accessible content. So key distinction there between obviously that and an overlay where things are kind of out of your control. That's it. Take a sip. And I just brought up some screenshots here of the demo page, which you can also see for yourself. You can actually play with it and see for yourself. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that it detects certain issues you would see as an editor. It tries to highlight the issues that it would see. In this case, we've got heading a tag without any text. So it's now, this would be an issue for screen readers, for example. This would come as a screen reader user. It could be quite confusing. So that's something that can be addressed from that. Again, of course, editors are not always accessibility gurus. So it's good to have these things made aware to them. That can also be controversial because some of these things, the results are not always applicable. Sometimes it can be a bit controversial, this, but it's very helpful to the user. Manual check was a heading level skipped. Again, if you're using the screen reader, this might be confusing for screen reader users. Be worth be aware of. the long heading, things like the Mac and VoiceOver, I think they can display the headings, and you can, it can be quite confusing to have a very long heading and you're trying to navigate the page and it's very not. So these are helpful tips to say, look, just be aware of this as you're creating your content. The logical order of the headings, does that work? And I do apologize. And the alt text, their images marked as decorative. It's controversial. Some people, people have different views on this, and I can sometimes see the case for decorative, but then other people say no, it's an image. It's going to have alt text, and so I'm not going to go there just today. But there is an interesting discussion. It's worth being aware of that. So it's definitely a really good mod. So those are just a couple of examples of something that you can use as part of your content management system to try and make your content management system aim for this idea of built-in accessibility, or at least to try and implement some guardrails to stop you going on. Those are a couple of ideas. Okay, it's at this point that I'm in danger of going a little bit, people talk about shift left. I might just be careering off here because this is a very recent addition to this presentation. So, but it is something that's important, and I want to raise it because I find it interesting coming up. Sustainability. Okay, now there's a little bit of a story behind this, but I just find this quite interesting that there are some. I'm coming to the conclusion, and it's not just me. Obviously, I'm being made aware of this. Is that there's actually quite a lot of links between accessibility and sustainability. That web accessibility and web sustainability share several overlapping themes and mutually beneficial practices when you look at them. So the synergy creates a powerful force for positive change in the digital landscape, which can benefit both users and the environment. Okay. Now, how did I get here? I keep coming back to this issue. Well, how did I get? Because this was a quite recent addition to this. Because I've done this presentation before, but I must admit this bit's a bit new. But I did want to mention it because it's becoming more and more important in my world, and I certainly wanted to sort of share that with people here. So how did I get here? At the University of Edinburgh over the summer, we had 3 student internships who were working as part of an overarching project at the university about sustainability within the university. One of the things that we're investigating here is the sustainability challenges, never mind the university overall, but particularly within the university's web estate and the research potential, and the project was to research potential solutions that we could consider in the future. I didn't come, I do apologize. I didn't come with like facts up my sleeve about things, but I've heard some people use some wild comparisons saying that if you look at the data centers across the world, that it equivalents the aircraft industry. Now, like if the aircraft industry is comparable with data centers. Now, I don't have any evidence up my sleeve for that, but I've certainly heard that people are concerned about data centers and the energy use of these data centers. With the Can I get through this presentation without saying AI? No, I can't. Okay, AI. AI, I quite like some of the AI stuff, but I really find it hard to see how it's sustainable. The initial AI work that's out there, I'm sure that clever computer scientists will work on ways of improving it, but it's a bit like blockchain or Bitcoin. It's all very well, but please don't tell me it's sustainable, because from what I can tell, it's like buying a Ferrari or something, or a Lamborghini. It's beautiful, it's great, but it's not sustainable. At least not what I'm seeing at the moment. I don't know if you saw some clip about Donald Trump saying that his new best friend Elon Musk was telling him, oh, well, this AI is great, you see, and we're going to build these mini nuclear reactors and we're going to power it. It's going to be great. And you're going, okay, that sounds a bit mad, but okay, right, okay. So anyway, dragging us back to this, we're looking at our environment and the university's whole, and we're looking at the whole green estate, like the whole, everything that we're doing, but including our data centers. We're using a lot of data centers. We use a lot of computing, high performance computing. But looking just at the web estate, if you can consider across the map, all the data centers that are driving our web services and our web apps, and it's a lot of carbon impact you'd be looking at. You've got to kind of consider that. So this was a project that we were looking at within our own, and we got Catalina, Osh, and Christopher to do some of the work. They've blogged about their recent experiences, and there's a link there, so you can. They've done a really good job of like trying to explain. We're not quite in the position where we're ready to report publicly just yet, but we're doing an internal review about what we're doing. And the objectives of the project were essentially to investigate how the web estate impacts the environment, research and identify metrics to measure the environmental impact, use metrics to measure the environmental impact of the web estate, research and implement sustainable UX design practices about what we could do going forward, and to deliver those recommendations to us. So it's early days, but they've done great work, and I would really encourage you to go back to their recent blogging about this. Some really very interesting things that they've come up with recently. But and I mean, I could go on a little bit more, but there's part of this so-called workshop, which I meant to sort of tease ideas at you, so I'm not going to sort of give you too much of a clue. But it led me to start thinking about this idea about, because I'm interested in web accessibility, and up until recently, I was maybe not as interested, or it's not that I wasn't interested, but I could see that sustainability was an issue, but I didn't quite bring the two together. But I was watching a webinar of there's a colleague, there's a company called Little Forest who do automated website health and website accessibility testing as a service. And we partner with Little Forest, and the chief executive's a man called Gavin Colborne. And I was on a webinar that he was doing recently, and he was saying this again, that web accessibility and web sustainability share several overlapping themes and mutually beneficial practices. There's a lot of overlap there. Maybe in the same way that you could say that accessibility and SEO, there's some nice ways that they overlap. They're not the same thing, but they overlap quite nicely, or user-centered design, there's some nice overlaps there. They're not the same thing, but you could see some things that they could overlap with nicely. So here's just I could go on about this for quite some time, but I'll restrict myself to 3 examples here. User-centered design. So from accessibility, you can ensure that websites are usable by people with various disabilities, including visual, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, neurological disabilities. Sustainability, it focuses on creating efficient and lean websites that provide a positive user experience. It minimizes unnecessary complexity and resource use. So there's some overlaps there. It's quite nice. Efficient code and content. So accessibility, you've got clean and semantic HTML, which helps assistive technologies interpret content correctly, using appropriate headings, labels, and alt text with images, using it in the correct way. But from a sustainability aspect, it can be efficient, well-organized code, can reduce server load and improves page load times, reduce energy consumption. Performance optimization. Faster websites benefit all users, including those using assistive technologies that can be negatively impacted by slow loading times. I think anybody who's used certainly one of the UK newspaper websites and all the overlays and all the videos and all the, I mean, if you try to think of somebody who's actually just trying to get to the content, especially if you're using an older computer, and also if you're using a mobile collection. I've been just come back from annual leave, and we've been in a campsite in the middle of nowhere, and when you're using a signal that's got 1 bar on your phone and you're trying to see, so I can sympathize with that. The idea of reducing file sizes, optimizing images, and leveraging caching not only improve performance, but also reduce the environmental impact on web hosting and data transfers. So this is an ongoing list, and I'm going to stop there. But the more you look into it, there's some nice overlaps there. There's a thing called the W3C Web Sustainability Guidelines that are in draft form. If you Google, I'm sorry I didn't put this in the link, but I can maybe do that later. If you Google Web Sustainability Guidelines, W3C, it's in draft form, so it's not ready yet, but it's an interesting document. Some people from the Drupal community, people like Mike Gifford, for example, have contributed to it. And it's a very interesting document. It's been very inspired by the guidelines are actually very inspired by the web accessibility guidelines. And so they've taken a lot of inspiration from that. And so as we now have legislation that we have to meet for accessibility, it's very early days with these guidelines, but we could be looking to the future where these guidelines could shape future legislation. Now, I don't have any evidence for that, but that's certainly the way I see things could be going. And we're taking this very seriously at the University of Edinburgh. I mean, Stratos, the head of web at the university, I mean, we've had conversations recently. This is something we're taking very seriously at the university. So this overlap and the way that they're related to each other, I'm finding quite interesting from an accessibility perspective, and I'm seeing how this is coming up over here. Right, okay, this is the bit that I maybe haven't planned too much on, but never mind. Um, I'm giving you a workshop exercise. I'm, I'm pretty flexible about this. I was initially thinking, look, just maybe turn to your neighbor and just like have some conversations. I'm not, or if you're not near your neighbor, turn to, I was thinking of setting aside maybe some time. I'll maybe sort of just double check how we're doing for time, but maybe it's just like maybe sort of 10 minutes or about at some point somebody will just get fed up and say, look, I'm fed up with this, let's move on. But chat to your colleague or chat to someone next to you. Think about from your own respective web platform that you use or you're responsible for. It's probably Drupal, but it may not be. What strategies or tools would you consider in implementing an accessibility governance approach on your own web platform? I've referred to some of the things that we're looking at for our web platform. What strategies and tools, thinking about your user base, thinking about how you train and support that for your people. What would you consider, what measures could you take to better enforce web accessibility compliance on your web platform? That's probably the focus, but if you've got time, by all means, try and bring in aspects to that about improving sustainability governance as well. I'd probably say, like, like have a little think about the accessibility governance. But if you've got a little bit of time, I'll do about sustainability. I'll probably give it, say, just say 15 minutes. Is that too long or any feedback? I'll try 15 minutes. If people just say we're fed up, then I'll just like, I'll move on quite quickly. Just have some discussions. And then I'll probably what I'll do is that at the end of it, I'll maybe just like ask people to put their hands up and just relay some ideas, just to get some ideas out there. I think there's a live Q&A that by all means feel free to maybe include that as well. That could be logged as well if you want it, if you're using the app. I don't use the app very much, but I'm told that that's something that people could do as well. And it's just to promote a bit of discussion. And I'd like to think at some point I'll get the hint that people are bored and they're just fed up with this, but it's just to promote this. I'll leave that up there. Shall I leave it for 10, 15 minutes until I get the mood music that I should just move on? Talk to your neighbors, give it a go. Okay, shall I try and pull us into back to presentation mode again? Okay, I'll be the first to admit I've not really thought this through terribly well, but I really appreciate you saying, well, thank you for staying. That's the first thing. I realize a lot of people sort of moved on, but I'm really grateful for you staying. I might ask in the first instance if anyone would like wanted to say something from based upon the discussions, could they maybe grab the microphone just so it could go in any recordings? If anyone wanted to sort of like relate some of the discussions they had, I would really appreciate if somebody grabbed the microphone because then I think we could be picked up in the recording as well. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Grab it. Yeah, our group said some stuff about having like hints in the editor, like a way of indicating to people what the heading level actually means rather than bigger and smaller, which I think is the main interpretation.
Yeah.
And also being like training was probably the biggest tool that we wanted to.
I should also point out that that's a thing that I've not really talked too much about. There's a big effort at the university for our website publishing platform for training and support. Like there's mandatory training. You have to go through about approximately an hour and a half of training just to get onto the CMS system. But there's also additional mandatory training for effective digital. So yeah, it's not just the content management. So there's a lot going on. Certainly in our web project, there's a lot going on there. So training and support, documentation, key point. Yeah, absolutely.
And there was a tool that you said we used.
I also work in a university, and a massive issue that we have at the moment would be PDFs and the uploading of images with text and things like that.
Yeah.
So we've kind of started using Silktide. I don't know if you've heard of Silktide, but that's not within the editor experience. So that's like post-production.
Yeah.
But it's also, we use the paid platform to monitor the website. But the editors, we have 300 editors across the university. We encourage them to use the plugin, the free Chrome plugin for that. And it's fantastic. If anyone would like to check that out too, I'd really encourage it. It has lots of simulators as well for different things, mobile view, everything. It's fantastic. But yeah, we would like to start looking into those guardrails that you spoke about. So we have limited the size of PDFs that can be uploaded. So I suppose that kind of ties into sustainability as well.
Yeah.
Images too. But we'd love to start looking deeper into scanning the content that's being uploaded for its accessibility. PDFs would need to be 100% accessible. That's a huge kind of statement to make, but we would love to get to that point where only 100% accessible PDFs are uploaded.
Yeah.
Ideally, we would like no PDFs, of course, but all HTML. But there'll be a very long time before we get to that, and to try and stop images of text being uploaded as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I also, you made a very good point as well, but that was really a lot of good points there as well. I also mentioned that our process is also backed up by continuous auditing. Like we've got, we use a tool, it's called Little Forest, but as you say, there are other platforms out there that do automated testing. We like Little Forest for a number of reasons, but there's one of the reasons that we have quite a large web estate. And so by being able to track on a large scale the number of websites we have, it's very good for that. And that'll be common for a lot of organizations. So automated testing, manual testing as well. My colleague Vicky would be sort of screaming in my ear, only 20 to 30% of issues get picked up by automated testing. You have to do manual testing as part of your process. And certainly under our, the remit by the Government Data and Digital Office, that they're always looking at us, we have to do that. And it's quite right that we should be doing that. So it's be aware that it's not just good enough to think, oh, my automated testing tells me fine. You must do manual testing as well. That's something that I would communicate very much so as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'm also slightly aware of time, so maybe one more. I don't know if anybody else wanted to. Sorry. Thank you.
I'll bring that up.
Just one more. I would like to share some maybe interesting requirement that we had from our client, Total Energy. They also had a presentation here, but never mind. So they want to measure exactly how sustainable the website is, and there are certain tools. One of them that we use is EcoGrader.
Yeah.
So you paste in the link and gives you like the score, and similar like performance testing, let's say Lighthouse does, but it's focused on like the emissions, the page weight. So they were obligated by the law actually, so they meet certain requirements. Yeah, but so we need to be, we had to be compliant in this one as well, not just accessibility, but also the page emissions.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you for mentioning EcoGrader. I'm not really that familiar with EcoGrader, but
Yeah,
I've certainly heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one is Website Carbon, but the one that we use, EcoGrader, it was demanded by the client.
Yeah, no, because as I say, this is certainly a big deal at the University of Edinburgh, and I know that there'll be a lot of organisations that sustainability is coming up again. As I say, I don't. I do check out those blog posts by our interns because some very interesting insights to what they were publishing as well. Some of the things that I was like picking up from some of the information that I've had in recent meetings was that, for example, reducing page weight, for example, things like aiming to try and get the overall page of a website less than 2 megabytes per page, minimizing the use of third-party web tools and trying to minimize image sizes, videos, CSS, even JavaScript and CSS. So reducing page weight, these are like some of the things that we were coming across. Hosting optimization, that's a very interesting area, which I hold my hands up. I'm not absolutely sure about, but there's like reducing server usage, then minimizing storage use of data. So as you mentioned with PDFs, you may have like an entire people be using your website as a document repository when they really shouldn't have. And some of those PDFs get out of hand. So doing a content audit to try and get those things off the server. Do they absolutely need to be there? Is that, maybe they should be handled in a different way. Moving to a more environmentally friendly hosting solution. Now that's so out of my depth it's untrue, but it is interesting that I certainly was at a presentation recently by an agency and they were trying to work with hosting partners about the carbon impact about their hosting providers. And the answer that I've heard is that essentially, depending on who you talk to, it's complicated. Depending on who you talk to, but you try and get exact data about some. And I think that a lot of the sustainability things, just trying to get precise data is quite difficult. It's not always easy to exactly get that information. But it is interesting how the agency that I was at their presentation, and I won't say too much, but it was interesting how they worked with a platform provider, and it was interesting how they felt from their perspective that they got the most feedback and the most responsiveness was from a company that had an internal champion in the organization, that there was a company within the company, I won't mention names, but the company in particular had an internal champion that were determined to like go and do the hard work and digging and actually get some real data from them. And from an agency's perspective, because there was an agency as well that was specializing in sustainability, and they said that that made the big difference, is that having a champion in the hosting organization really was something that they really respected, because there's, depending on who you're partnering with, they may not always either have the information or they may not be that cooperative. So it is interesting as well. No, that's a very interesting point you make about that. Also, just want to mention caching optimization. Making sure that you're using the best caching solutions to. And Drupal has some very good caching built into it already, but then thinking about your hosting, about like CDNs and things like that. So those were some of the things that came up in our, but I'm not an expert in this, but these are, again, these leads to performance and sustainability issues. Thank you. I'd better move on because I really do appreciate your time. So I'm just going to hopefully wrap up and make some sort of few more points here. One of the titles in this presentation is about website governance, and I wanted to talk about some of the pillars of website governance from the perspective of the University of Edinburgh. This is not a precise list, this is just one that I came up with, but it certainly reflects the things that we are concerned about at the University of Edinburgh. Security is a public sector organisation. Security is really very profoundly important to us at the University of Edinburgh. Privacy is very important to the University of Edinburgh. Accessibility, again, regulations. I also mentioned with security, we have large parts of the university that are involved with healthcare, very sensitive data sets. So it's very critical that we're concerned about privacy and security. So these are these ideas of principles and pillars of web governance, user experience, increasingly sustainability. We're early on our journey, but I think the other four pillars are more mature. But the last one is certainly coming up. We're taking that very seriously on our horizon at university. So these 5 pillars that I admittedly have just brought together, these principles have been adopted into the university website publishing platform, certainly the first 4, and we're sort of examining, as you say, how we can improve, and the sustainability pillar as well, how we can bring that more maturity into our platform. The team, the website team, are working to bake in a number of these principles into the university website publishing platform that I've been discussing. It's a key part of our web strategy and the continuous improvement approach that we have. Our system is obviously based on Drupal. We're on Drupal 10. One day we'll be on Drupal 11, but I'm not going to get into trouble about that. But just go on Drupal 10. But anyway. So we're really we're on a continuous improvement pathway, just like as Drupal is. So that's very fundamentally important to us. I had a little chat with our Drupal lead at the University of Edinburgh, Billy Waldrop, and he was citing to me the importance of scale of deployment of this platform. We're in the middle right now of a migration process of moving from the old EdWeb to EdWeb 2, the new platform based upon EdWeb 10 and Drupal 10. And we have many websites on the web estate and on the web platform. We have many, many users on our web estate and platform. And when I talk about scale, we are looking to deliver a number of these built-in principles. A number of these principles are aimed to built into these aspects of web governance. And this is an idea of basically scaling that out to all these users who are using this, and to deliver that across a scale. So we're talking, again, hundreds of websites. Certainly over 1,000 users, maybe more. I'm sort of got to be careful here. I don't want to get into too much trouble, because our web estate in the big picture is historical, and we've got, it's not just the website publishing platform. It's not just the central system. Over years, we've built a lot of, and I'm trying not to get into trouble here. We're sort of having to have a plan of action on that stuff, sort of an audit, as it were. But this idea of being able to deploy our central website platform as almost like a one-stop shop, where we can sort of build in privacy, security, accessibility, user experience, sustainability, brand guidelines, trying to build this up at a scale where we can deliver that at scale. It's really something that Billy was mentioning about the importance of being able to do that and to deliver all that goodness, I suppose, from my perspective, accessibility, but other things as well. So it's worth bearing in mind. So just talking to a nice man there about who's leading accessibility for Drupal Starshot. I see a lot of similarities with Drupal Starshot. I'm seeing that potentially security, the stuff that you really get some good, people use historically Drupal for security, very good reputation for security, privacy, accessibility, user experience, and going forward, sustainability as well. I see that these are principles that have been adopted into Drupal core, again, these sort of guardrails, and the Drupal Starshot initiative. I'd like more progress to be done of that. This is something that a number of people in the Drupal community are keen to bake into Drupal Starshot, and it's early days, but a number of these principles are already in Drupal core, and we're looking to Drupal Starshot to sort of build that in to deliver that key part of the strategy. And again, the scale of it, the ability to cite in the importance of scale of deployment of Drupal. Many sites are already on Drupal, maybe many to come on something Drupal Starshot, Drupal CMS, as Dries wants us to call it, going forward. Going forward, being able to scale all the benefits of these things, including built-in accessibility, built-in sustainability. I don't know this for a fact, but I think at one of the presentations I was at, I believe that Drupal 11 is looking to bring in using the WebP image format by default. Now, somebody can correct me on that, but I think there's already a module that you can do that, but I think it's voluntary, whereas I believe that I'm told that at some point with Drupal 11, the look is to bring in, now I think WebP file format is a much more efficient image format that can be used, and bringing like when I think in the past Drupal used like lazy loading, it brought it in, I think Drupal later, this is something that it can bring in, and people can get the benefit by using the platform through a continuous improvement process. So it's quite powerful stuff. And if you go and look at a lot of you'll be familiar with the principles laid out in the Open Web Manifesto, it's quite powerful. This stuff's quite powerful. You can scale this out to people who are already on the track. You're on the train tracks for your Drupal 10, 11 going forward. You're on the train tracks for Drupal Starshot, and you can build these governance and you can build the goodness into that. And people who are already on the train can get the benefit as it goes forward. So there's a lot to like about there with Drupal. And I think that's why I find Drupal Starshot very exciting and very interesting initiative. It's early days, but I'm finding it very, very promising. And yeah, strands. I wanted to, this was like a little reference to my dear colleague. He sadly moved on now. He's the past month or so he's moved on, but he was the product manager at the University of Edinburgh for EdWeb, and it's called Bruce Darby. And a little chat with him before he left. And I was talking about the presentation I was going to give, and he had this idea of strands. And what he was referring to was that security, privacy, accessibility, user experience, sustainability, approaches like this can help pull these strands together. It's like a way into governance, like pulling more people in together and opening minds. Like maybe say you're on the project, you work on Drupal, and you only do a certain aspect of your interest. You may be focused on security, for example. But by being part of an ecosystem that's concerned about these other pillars of governance, you're pulled into these other strands as well and related to your own work. Security needs to be accessible, for example. If you have like a login page to your Drupal website, that has to be accessible. You have to be able to log into your own website using assistive technologies if you have visual issues or disabilities that, if you depend on assistive technologies, your security needs to be accessible. There's some nice and that ties into user experience as well. What I mentioned there about like sustainability, people who are in different parts of the ecosystem are brought together. They need to think about all these things when they're producing content and code for the project, that they need to think about all these things, and they're together. It's less easy to dismiss related pillars, and it's sort of embedded into the process. Again, laid out, if you look at the Open Web Manifesto, there's a lot of values there, and you try and pulled into this. So it's an interesting idea, and I think that's why I find Drupal a particularly interesting project. There are other content management systems out there, obviously, but I do find that there are people in the community who are very keen and they're very focused on these types of web governance, and there's a continuous improvement process. They want to pull people in together and relate to each other and work together on issues like that as part of the development process. So I just find that quite interesting, and I really appreciate. I'm short of time, so I'm just going to quickly go through a part of looking at accessibility at every step. If you look at the entire life cycle of the whole production of a website, you start from the beginning, and accessibility has to be considered throughout the whole life cycle of the website. So from a planning strategy, right from the planning stage, choose an authoring tool that supports accessibility, interaction design, document all the accessibility aspects of the user interface, test authoring with users with disabilities, very important. Visual design, setting constraints for customizing color combinations, for example, for contrast, provide accessible examples like large enough touch targets. The development, pick themes specifically with accessibility support, pick plugins with accessibility support, quality assurance to embed automated accessibility tests into your authoring process, build manual testing into your quality assurance as well, and launch. So being aware that accessibility is every single stage of the journey. So my conclusion, we're nearly there. Accessibility can't be automated, and not everything is an easy fix, but there are remedies that we can build into design systems, browsers, and content management systems. Using a content management system that can be set up to work as an accessibility assistant for content editors. Our project, the upcoming university website publishing platform, it's a promising example of this. We're not perfect. We know that when you look at our work, we're on a journey, and nobody is ever going to get to perfection, but we've got a very strong web strategy, like I talk about, and platforms like Drupal that really help you keep continuous improvement on keeping high standards in certain areas. That's really a very key, and also the themes and that we use on top of Drupal. That really is key part of our strategy, and it's also a very exciting potential opportunity for Drupal Starshot. I see a lot of potential, and I know that my colleague Emma and there's many other colleagues they're working really hard on building a product that is very wants to build in these pillars of governance, you know, and like whether it be accessibility, user experience, like privacy, security, a lot of hard work going into developing something that'll be used by all and it'll be good for all and will promote high values. And it's something interesting in Drupal. There are other systems out there, but Drupal's in a good place at the moment. And I'm really very interested being backed with these values, the Open Web Manifesto, some good people. I think Drupal's in a very good place and has been used by, obviously, people know about like the use of governments and higher education. You know, like people have used Drupal, European Commission. A lot of people have used Drupal for many, many years, and with good reason, because they have in many ways very high standards. Accessibility and sustainability is easier when you do it earlier and consider it throughout the whole life cycle of the website. Thank you for your time. I realize that was quite a long time, but I really appreciate the time. I'm available like LinkedIn if everyone wants to reach out, but I really appreciate your time in this. Thank you for the workshop. May have been a bit messy, but I'm glad that you bared with it. Thank you for sticking to the end. I know you're hungry. Just to say, I've got a little, I'll make the slides available, but there's, if do feedback, let me know. I've not looked at the app. I'm not daring. I'll look at that later. I don't know, but I'll find out later if we're not done that. And of course, there's the contribution opportunities going forward. I really thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your DrupalCon. We may have time for.
There's one question from Maria R. She asks, from the business side, how do you incentivize site owners to use precious resources and adopting something they will not see any revenue from?
That is a great question. Thank you. That's a brilliant question. Right. You floored me. Well, one of the things that I'm happy for somebody to follow me up on this, because I might not be answering this question entirely right, but the website publishing platform, we're really intending it to be a so-called one-stop shop. Like I spoke to colleagues in Princeton University, and that's their attitude, is that people come to them and they offer their equivalent to the website publishing platform. And it's a one-stop shop. You come and you use their framework, and it's basically what's available there. And all the investment has went into that framework, and so there's a lot of documentation, a lot of guidelines, a lot of training and support, and you're encouraged to say, look, whatever you're doing, do this. And so you could argue that a lot of the, I mean, University of Edinburgh, it's kind of hard to compare because I don't work at other universities, but the University of Edinburgh, it's a very big university and a lot of investment has gone into this project. And the investment, we're all paying for this. I'm in the law school, but there's a lot of other parts of the university where we're all paying for this. All the money's kind of gone into the investment of this platform. So then the theory goes, okay, well, okay, so we paid for this platform and it's got a lot of flexibility in this platform. There's a lot of flexibility. So because it's quite flexible up to a point, but with guardrails, use this platform and bluntly put, don't use something else. That's the message. Now, so I think the answer would be is that if you want to come along and do something and you've got a particular user case, we really, the answer would be really try and move you into the website publishing platform. That's the official answer. Now, I'd love to tell you that we were 100% consistent on that. I'd be lying if I said that. But that's the answer that we said. Look, I think the intellectual argument would be, look, we've put so much investment and effort into this single one-stop shop solution that whatever you're trying to do, use this. Now, does that mean that sometimes somebody comes along and we have to do something different? Well, that has happened and can happen, but that's the official answer. And I'm not going to say much more than that because otherwise I'll get into trouble. But I don't know if that quite answers the question. But when it comes to like justifying resource and budget, the argument is, look, we've provided this for everybody throughout the university, thousands of users, tens of thousands of students. This is for everybody in the university. Use this. We've made great efforts to say this is the platform that you use, and you have to make an exceptional case to somehow make. You'd have to make an exceptional case to do something very bespoke. Because in some, I mean, certainly from the website publishing platform, if you were trying to replicate the wheel, you'd be like reinventing the wheel, and there'd be a lot of cost and effort into what is essentially, you know, and also in our university, you have to use Drupal, you know, like our default content management system is Drupal. So in many ways, you'd be just duplicating effort. It's like we're already using Drupal. We're already using Drupal already. So I don't know if that quite answered the question, but the initial answer would be, look, use our existing platform, and then you'd have to make an exceptional case to use to sort of justify spend. I don't know if that entirely answers the question, but it can happen though. People can come along with a specific case and say, well, we need this, and that can happen, yeah. Not sure if I answered that entirely adequately, but feel free to reach out or try and ask any questions after that if you want to follow up on that. Thank you so much.